There's a suit on and there's places to go.
Hey, Eugene.
Here we go.
I didn't do it as well as when I first answered the phone, because when I first answered the phone, I was really thinking about like spaghetti.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So to talk about the Kurt Cobain list, I have a question. First of all, was this list just the thing that was published in the diaries?
I think so. Yeah, he wrote it out, his top 50 in one of his diary entries.
Okay, yeah. So I have that. You have that book probably too, right? Because that book came out almost like 20 years ago.
You know what's funny, man? I remember when it came out, it made me feel a certain kind of way. Like I didn't feel good about it. Like I remember going to, I don't know, it was like Borders or Barnes and Noble or one of those big chains. And I remember holding it and like opening it up and looking at a page or two, but it felt, and I don't mean to sound like melodramatic or cheesy or whatever, but I felt weird. I didn't like the feeling of flipping through the diary. So I never really, that's the only book about him and his band that I've never looked at. I've read pretty much all the rest.
I've read a few books, and I had a friend who gave that to me as a gift. And it wasn't a thing that you would read straight through the way you'd read a biography or something. It was something that you really were just kind of dipping in. And my thing really, the stuff that really stood out to me was the stuff like that list that's now kind of making the rounds and is kind of a big deal, in the sense that I was really curious as to like what he was thinking about music and stuff like that. And
he was one of those dudes that I sort of categorize the same way I categorize the way you view and take in music. It's very studious, very dedicated, very eloquent about how you speak about something because you've given it a lot of thought, or you just have a wide array of listening habits. And while I think most of the stuff that he listened to was in the punk and the pop genres back then, he was way ahead of the curve on a lot of stuff.
he was really ahead of the curve. And I think that if he'd been given a chance to kind of get out of that state he was in when, he died, right? He passed.
Yeah.
Then I think he would have had an opportunity to really he would have had a really broader musical palette. Now, I don't know if that would have been reflected in what he was trying to do musically. Like, I don't know if, say, Nirvana kept going, I don't know if, and he starts to really expand his knowledge about music, if he would have been incorporating like electronic sort of stuff or like jazz sort of stuff or whatever. But who knows? The thing about him, I think that in hindsight, and this is a little bit of a digression, but I think that one of the things we realize about him is that he was really tasteful in how things got incorporated into Nirvana's music and sound. And in some ways you could say that about a lot of those guys. I don't like Pearl Jam, but I think Pearl Jam has been pretty conscientious about how they let their sound develop and how things come in. A lot of those bands like Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, whatever, they never did anything really radically sort of trendy or whatever. There was, anytime they incorporated other sorts of aesthetic things, it was always done in a really tasteful way.
They had the benefit of sort of being put at the front of the line for the era as far as trend setting went.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether you believe them to be bands that were cutting edge. I mean, depends on what type of stuff you're listening to, but they were sort of, those were the pop stars back then, right? I mean, like rock and roll was, there was other versions of pop, obviously, but a little more standard stuff like the Madonnas and that kind of shit. But yeah, they were sort of trendsetters in a way, right? They kind of
Well, they legitimately turned the hourglass over, because it was like, you figure like the 60s or something, you had this thing where it was like the Beatles and Stones and these other bands that were new, and they were playing sort of rock and roll as people kind of knew it in the 50s, but it had this new energy and this kind of new look and this new aesthetic, and it dominated the charts. And then all the people that had been pop and successful in that way, they all tried to sort of accommodate. It's not just the genre or the style, it's an aesthetic, it's the whole comprehensive thing that was that 60s rock and roll. Then you go through the 70s, or I don't know what's going on really with the 70s. And then the 80s was really where the machine of pop music, commercial pop music, really reasserted itself. And when the grunge thing became, like you're saying, the template by which what's popular is being discovered, is being listened to, it really flipped everything upside down. And it was also something that I think must have really blown older people's minds back then, that now you had something that was really just sort of not market tested, not really super glossy, just really kind of more raw rock and roll metalish kind of music getting out there and getting big and dictating what was going on in the culture.
Yeah, I wonder how the metalheads thought back then, because did I ever tell you about that story when I went to the Musicians Institute back in 2004, and I remember going down the halls and seeing a flyer for, it was called hostile counseling or whatever. I didn't put two and two together. It was just a class about how to like put touring together and how to do, how to book shows and this and this and that. But what I didn't realize is that the guy putting it on was like the head of like the metal side of the vocal department.
Uh-huh.
So when I showed up, it was just nothing but metalheads, dudes in like Motorhead t-shirts, and here I am sitting there. I can't remember how it came about, but I remember asking certain questions, and the dude asked me what I listened to, and I think I was like, I like a Soundgarden and everybody in the room was just like, ugh. I was and I named, not it was obviously at the time it was the grunge stuff, like whatever, but they just were not having it, dude. And I just remember never went back. And not only that, but the next time I saw that same flyer around the halls, the dude changed it and made it big bold print, metal only. And I remember being like, dude, I think I was the cause of that.
That was you. You were the catalyst. I was reading Guitar World and Guitar Player magazine back then. I think more Guitar World, because Guitar World had more tabs and stuff. And you
Okay.
really got a sense, because, you didn't really have the internet. And we're talking like the mid 90s, 94, 95. And so, people get their opinions voiced by writing into Guitar World or whatever. And it seemed like a lot of the people who were the metal guys, there was a really big backlash for a lot of them, and the people that I guess you could say kind of probably they did not have much success on their own, but what their sort of aspirations to do musically would be sort of to like maybe revive like a Aerosmith, Lynyrd Skynyrd, maybe close to Motorhead kind of vibe, like a 70s harder classic rock kind of thing. They didn't like it either. And I think that's why Pantera in some ways was really big in like the Guitar World magazines. On one hand, like Dimebag Darrell was a really amazing guitarist, but I think that some of their popularity had to do with the fact that one of the things that Nirvana showed, grunge showed, but Nirvana especially showed, was this stuff like Europe, and I like Warrant, like their first album, and Poison has some good songs. I like a lot of glam metal, but Nirvana really showed those bands to be very, in a lot of ways, superficial or at least dependent on commercial appeal, physical appearance, whatever. And it really showed that they were detached from like a really intense sort of like energy that that rock fans always kind of want to have. Pantera had been working in the other direction, and they kind of were like, no, we're gonna be metal, and we're going to show the sort of updated, kind of evolved face of metal. And I think that's part of why they were so popular, is that the people who felt that Nirvana had kind of taken the air out of the late 80s metal and whatever, and now that had been kind of ruined for them, Pantera represented this antidote to that, saying, no, metal's still alive, and it's even more aggressive than ever. I think that's kind of what was going on. And but I know that what ended up happening is that almost every one of those metal people that was complaining about grunge and Nirvana and everything, by the time you get into the aughts and definitely by the tens, they're all now super nostalgic about grunge and the 90s and all that stuff. So almost to a man, all that resentment and everything is turned into either fond nostalgia or like really like a love. But I think you did have a time for about 7 to 8 years, 10 years tops, where there was animosity. I think the positive ramifications of it was this rise of Pantera being a really viable conduit for what heavy metal is.
Do you think that the nostalgia, the sort of like hindsight that comes that you just sort of described, strictly to the fact that rock and roll has sort of lost its teeth, lost its the heights of its perch? Or do you think that's a result of?
It's tempting to kind of say that it's because alternative music has gotten way worse. And really, as a quick aside to that, I saw a thing. It was a thing that popped up on my phone like 6 months ago or something. And it was like the top 10 albums from the last 15, 20 years or whatever, or something. It was a really long list. And it was some hip kind of Pitchfork tier blog website or whatever, but not exactly Pitchfork. So there was lots of really great albums here. And you remember the Wrens, the Meadowlands?
Meadowlands is a great album. Love that
Oh,
album.
it's so good. That album was in there. So it was like that type of list. Like they knew what they were doing, right? And as you're going through this thing and you're seeing all this indie rock from like 96, 97, 2000, 2004, whatever. But once you get to around 2015, 2013, 2014, whatever, the artists that I recognized on the list, it just kept getting less and less and less. And so in a sense, I do think alternative music is where rock and roll is, the spirit of rock and roll is going to either be found or it's going to be saved or it's going to find redemption. Yes, it's dire, but I think for some reason, what happened in Seattle, almost across the board, I'll even throw like Candlebox in there, as far as like there's songs that were good. Across the board, you had such a zeitgeist of incredible songwriting and great musicianship. Like Rick Beato dissects what Chris Cornell does on like Black Hole Sun and a lot of these Soundgarden songs,
Oh,
dude.
yeah. Is that when you starting with the diminished chord, a pop song starting with a diminished chord?
It's also they use weird time signatures. Like Black Hole Sun is like going from like 5 to like 11 to like 4 or something. Like Soundgarden goes into weird ass time signatures.
Oh yeah.
And I think that what happened is that objective sort of brilliance that's there, and it's an objective brilliance that Elliott Smith has, Mozart had. It's there, and you're gonna wake up to it one day. I think that the majority of those people that live through that, yeah, there's a nostalgia. Like, I don't really like Pearl Jam, but if I hear Pearl Jam come on the radio, like a live or something, I'm not going to turn it off. I'll listen to it because it's like, it's basically good. And yeah, it does take me back to a time that was like, because the nostalgia factor is really important. But like a lot of that stuff, like a lot of Soundgarden stuff on like Super Unknown or whatever, or of down on the upside. It's just objectively brilliant in a way that someone like Kurt Weill or Ty Segall or whatever could never achieve, because their whole deal is, I have to bash somebody in this. Their whole deal is to be totally derivative of something that was probably brilliant. Part of the brilliance of that grunge stuff is that whether it's Mudhoney or Soundgarden, Nirvana or Alice in Chains, is that it was totally sui generis. It was totally unique. All those classic albums, they didn't sound like anything that had come before. It had been influenced by things, but it was really its own thing that was making its own way. And I think that objective genius is what the heavy metal fans who now appreciate it latch onto.
Let's go through really quick. I want your thoughts on some of your favorite albums on this top 50 list.
I was stoked that he had Aerosmith because I love Aerosmith. Aerosmith gets bashed a lot. Aerosmith is one of those bands, they're kind of like Def Leppard. Like, they're kind of a hard band to imitate. So as a musician or a songwriter, you don't really ever learn anything from them. But they are a fun listen. They're like a fun band to listen to. And their albums and stuff are really good. And I kind of like this video that popped up where I saw where he's talking about loving Aerosmith. So I was really stoked that he had Aerosmith on there. And I really liked his selection of, I really liked the fact that he had Locust Abortion Technician by the Butthole Surfers. I thought that was awesome because that's my favorite album by them.
Anything else on there? Obviously there's Daniel Johnston.
Talk about the Fang, because you were the one that had the insight about the Fang album.
Oh, Fang, yeah. Which Fang album was it again? It was
Is it Landshark?
Landshark, yeah, Landshark. I had never heard Fang. It's funny, man. Like Kurt, what I appreciate about him is that his listening tastes were so ahead of the curve of just generic music listeners. On Landshark, there's a song, I can't remember the name of it. There was a riff that was straight out of Aneurysm, his song Aneurysm. Just like kind of like the time signature was changed, and he does that with the band Flipper too. There, that song off of In Utero toward the back. It's either, I don't think it's Radio Friendly Unit Shifter. It's Tourette's, literally a Flipper song, if I'm recalling correctly. Some people might be like, "Oh, he rips it off. Oh, he's derivative." Who the fuck's listening to Flipper and Fang other than the hardcore punk people anyway?
It was only when you told me, when you were like, you texted me and you were like, I'm listening to the Fang album. And you're like, dude, I totally hearing the influence. And I didn't have a chance to throw it on yet. But I was like thinking about that album and I was like, yeah, he's right, dude. That sound had to have been really inspirational. And that was the thing with those guys, is that if they took something from an old song where and the famous one with Nirvana is they took the Come As You Are riff from Killing Joke, right?
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's funny.
Yeah, there was some litigation over it, but they took that riff from Killing Joke. So they took that, and then there's that whole Green River song. It's called Swallow My Pride, and Soundgarden did it as well. And there's like this ambiguity as to who wrote it, whether it's Chris Cornell or Mark Arm. I'm not sure if both of them do it, but there's this whole thing at the end where they just go into This Ain't the Summer of Love by Blue Oyster Cult. And it's like, they're just taking it, and I think that's kind of the spirit of another thing that aligns that 90s grunge thing with that 60s rock and roll explosion, is that you had this just unfettered mining of your source material, and it's not like a really calculated thing. Like, you assume someone like Lady Gaga listens to a song from the 80s and her producers, they do this calculated thing to get the beat and do this and maybe steal the melody from some other album or whatever. This is the opposite. It's just like, oh, we're playing our own song, Swallow My Pride, which is just like grimy, evil rock and roll metal, grunge. And then, oh, well, we kind of like hate this baby boomer sort of optimism. And here's this song from Blue Oyster Cult that was totally like deriding that back in like the 70s. Just instinctively throw that chorus in there, So I think that all that stuff that happened where those grunge bands took this stuff from punk and whatever, I think that they were just genuinely interpolating it into the music because it fit what they were doing. And I think like what you're saying with Aneurysm,
it feels with that stuff that you were describing more like reverence than it does than it does anything else. There's like a purity to it. And I guess that goes for any band that rips off a band. Like that's probably what it is. But for some reason, coming from well-versed musicians who are just really passionate about what they're doing, it feels like less of a betrayal.
It shows that that stuff marked you, right? It like the Lady Gaga pop sort of thing is like saying, no, we're doing this sort of research and extraction thing. Whereas when Mark Armstrong's singing, this ain't the summer of love, this ain't the summer of love, it's not like a calculated thing. It shows that like that sort of 70s nihilism that Blue Oyster Cult was kind of pushing into the limelight or whatever. It marked Mark Arm. It marked those guys. It tagged them like, or you know what I'm saying? It's a thing where it's imprinted itself on you, so you let it out.
Is there anything on that list that kind of shocks you that you see on there that you're like, oh, I didn't see that coming? Or
I was pulling up my phone to look at the list right when you called, so I didn't have a chance to refresh. But he has a Swans album on there, right?
he's got the very last entry is Swan's Young God from 1984.
Yeah, I was really surprised that he listened. Well, I'm not that surprised, but it's pretty interesting that I read something where they were talking about Maynard was talking about Swans a lot when Tool started breaking out. And you'd be like, yeah, that makes sense that Tool would be talking about Swans. But like Kurt, I mean, the Daniel Johnston thing, that's just because we know. Everybody knows about the connection. He made Daniel Johnston a thing by wearing that shirt. And could you believe what a time that was that you could wear a T-shirt of a guy and then that makes that guy?
Oh yeah.
Wild.
Well, I mean, and also, I mean, but Daniel Johnston could be a whole separate thing, but you know, in the mid '80s, he just like wandered onto MTV. That's how fucking.
Yeah, that's true.
You know what I mean? That was another thing that I always liked about what he did with this gigantic dose of fame that they were given. He took bands that you would have never heard of, for lack of a better term, forgive me, injected them into the fucking mainstream, like, you know, the Vaselines or Shonen Knife, or it's not like they're like household names, but if you like Nirvana, these bands pop up so much through who he had open for them, or just you hear him talking about them so much, is that he really kind of spread the love in that way, which is something that every person who's in a band and daydreams about what they would do if they could just kind of crack that nut, break through the crust, and get up there, what they would do and who they would showcase and what, you know.
Yeah.
It's really cool that he did that, you know?
Yeah. And then the older you get, you hope that someone will do it for you.
Yeah. That's true.
You go from being somebody who thinks you're going to be helping make other people's careers to being like, man, I hope somebody's going to like play my song on their podcast or whatever.
We'll wrap this convo up with one last. I'm going to give you a trivia question. Are you ready?
Yeah, lay it on me.
Out of the, you know, top 50 albums, what band shows up the most?
Fuck, dude, I only looked at the list once.
Oh, it's all right. You don't need to know it. It's fine, but just
let me think. Now, is this a band that we obviously know is like one of his favorite bands, or
maybe not really. I've seen like his name or Nirvana and this band maybe kind of linked, but not because they played together or anything like that. But it's an early '80s band, and it's not one that you would naturally assume right away.
I almost thought that the smart choice would be the Melvins.
I don't think the Melvins even made the list.
They didn't make the list?
No, not one. Yeah.
Wow.
No nepotism in his list, man. No nepotism at all. Brutal. Which I agree, man. The Melvins.
I got the opposite. I got the opposite. You wanted me to name the thing with the most, and I named the thing with zero.
With zero.
Oh fuck! Well, what is it? What band?
The Wipers.
Really?
The Wipers have 3 albums on this list.
Okay, no. Well, the Butthole Surfers tied with them.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, Butthole Surfers tied because he has Locust Abortion Technician. I think he has Rembrandt Pussy Horse, and then there's one other album.
Oh, PP the Sailor.
He put two are listed under the same thing. Yeah, maybe but those are 2 different albums, I think. So I think I think it's 3 from them as well. But the Wipers, huh? They did what? Yeah. Return of the Rat?
Oh yeah, Locust Abortion Technician. Yeah, I see two Buttle Surfers albums on here, and they've got for the Wipers they got Is This Real 1980, Youth of America 1981, and then Over the Edge 1983. I've never listened to the Wipers, not once.
I just know that if Return of the Rat off of that one box set, if Return of the Rat is a Wipers song, then that's what I know, and it's via Nirvana. I don't know the Wipers though. Nirvana they would do those kind of weird drony songs, Return of the Rat, and Love
Right.
Buzz, won't you be my love? Like there was a weird chanty sort of drony thing that Nirvana could do sometimes. It's very different from the stuff that popped out like Teen Spirit or whatever. There was,
Right.
yeah, I think, and even about a Girl, as tuneful as About a Girl is, I think that it's a melancholic droning quality, but it's very unique. Did you ever hear that story that before he wrote About a Girl, that he had just like holed up in his apartment for a whole day listening to the
The
first
Beatles,
Beatles
right?
album?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then he wrote about such a solid tune, man.
It's so funny. I remember first time I heard it was on, and I don't know if I ever told you, but I was pretty late to the game with Nirvana. And now, obviously one of my favorite bands, but I remember listening to the Unplugged album when he opens the set with About a Girl. And the first thing he says is, this is from our first record. Most people don't own it. And I remember listening to it and then going, oh, I don't know this. And then
It was right at you.
yeah, dude. Yeah, yeah. I went back and listened to it. I remember I bought Bleach. I bought Bleach the next day, and then I returned it because
Oh,
I didn't get it. I was like, this sounds nothing like In Utero and Nevermind, and I don't know if I like it. And now it's the only album of theirs that I own. Uh, but back then, I mean, then we're talking, like late '90s. I think I got into them in like '99. Like I finally, like my hatred for their popularity waned enough that I think Tyler put on In Utero. I think I heard like Milk It, and I was like, this is incredible. But up until that point, I was just like, fuck this band. I don't want to
I
fucking
have
listen.
I have that, but I for some reason I'll do that. The only artist that I came around that when I was younger and I hated him and his deal, and then now I come and I really like him, although I admit he has a lot of flawed albums, is like Bruce Springsteen. Because you figure I was like a kid and the whole like Born in the USA, and now
Ugh.
you're seeing that on TV. Whether he's signing off on that imagery and that thing, it still was like really wrapped up in this kind of very like Ronald McDonald, Ronald Reagan kind of goofy, shiny 80s Americanism. And like, I don't know, man, I just really hated it. And I had to like get into Springsteen via like, well, everyone listens to Badlands and pretends they like it, and it's okay, but like it was Darkness on the Edge of Town, and I was like, okay, there's some substance to this guy, and he's got about 5 or 6 just really great albums. But I think that with the Nirvana thing, I think that it came at this time when that sort of vibe that the 80s had, which is a really sort of like constrictive, repressive sort of vibe. And it signaled the end of that. And I'll always remember them and that change. And it feels, just remembering it, it's like taking a big, deep breath out in like fresh air. It sounds cliched, but it really was. It really sort of just changed the dynamic of everything. And I was totally enchanted with it. I mean, I in one sense, and then all these bands started coming out. I remember hearing about Stone Temple Pilots and being like, how can I keep up with all these new bands? Yeah, I was young too, but it was a thing where the way it totally changed the landscape of what had been so repressive and constrictive. The 80s felt like you're wearing like a button-up shirt to church. And then the 90s and the Nirvana thing felt like church is over and now you're at your friend's house. You're not wearing those uncomfortable shoes anymore. You're wearing like shorts and a t-shirt and you guys are like running around in the yard. It was really like that type of transformation. I never had any misgivings about Nirvana. I was sometimes confused by like like In Bloom, the video, like, whoa, this is really wild. But I
Dude.
never had the like the contempt for them that I have towards like Wet Leg or Geese, right?
Right.
Yeah, like Geese, it's just I don't have to really listen to it. I get it. Like I've seen like American Apparel ads when I drive through Los Angeles. I see an American Apparel ad and I'm like, oh, I imagine that the way this looks is how Geese sounds, right?
Well, you brought up In Bloom. I'm pretty sure I told you just a quick story before
Lay it
we
on me.
I'll never forget this vivid memory of the first time I saw In Bloom, which, okay, let's see, In Bloom came out 91, right?
Yeah,
So that means I was 11, 12, maybe,
yeah.
something like that. And I remember it was like a weekend. And on the weekends, we would always go to my grandma's house. We would have dinner, like family dinner, big.
Grandma, take me home. Grandma, take me
Yeah,
home.
exactly. And then after dinner, the kids, like you said, go outside, and the grown-ups in Italian household, they bring out the coffee at 8 p.m. because, why not?
Yeah.
And they sit around and they're talking. And I remember that was back when MTV by the parents was still thought to be a bit, dangerous, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. No, I know.
So everybody's sort of distracted. And so I sneak into the living room and I turn on MTV because that was sort of like what I used to do. I turned on MTV and it was the beginning of In Bloom, and with the Ed Sullivan kind of knockoff thing.
Yeah.
And they start playing, and I remember, like, you talk about that visceral feeling of like a deep breath. I remember looking over my shoulder like, this is dangerous, scary stuff.
Yeah, no, I totally know what you're saying.
And I like had that feeling. And then when they start trashing their instruments and they're wearing dresses, I remember being like, what the fuck is this? And I couldn't wrap my brain around it. And fast forward, 3 or 4 years, or no, 2 years, or whatever, however old it was, and I'm in high school. The grunge thing is, full bore. Even with that moment that I had, like, it's like I blocked it out because they were so popular that I was like, fuck this. I'm going to be the one that doesn't like them.
I love that because I remember because we used to watch MTV up at my grandma's house. I was probably about 13, I think. Yeah, I was about 13. I'm just a little bit older than you. I was like 13. I remember seeing that. It was my cousins, we're in the other room, and MTV was totally forbidden and everything. And for like Catholic reasons, that's why like you get like all the black metal with me, because it's like it was religious reasons or why you can't like enjoy this music, So, but dude, you totally knew when you're seeing that In Bloom video. You're like, whoa.
Yes.
I do not want my parents walking in on me when I'm watching this. But I'm going to throw on. I was listening to Dissection, but I'm going to throw on some Nirvana now. This conversation has really gotten me inspired.
Why are you always the one who's out of step? Is there something the matter with you?